For 6 agonizing years, Ryu Jin-woo, the most feared syndicate boss in Seoul, hasn't slept a single wink. Power, money, and fear couldn't buy him an ounce of peace. His enemies whispered that his own demons were finally driving him mad. But everything changed the day she walked through his heavily guarded doors. Meet Amara. She isn't your average trembling employee, but rather the fiercely independent, strong female lead driving this unique Afro-Korean story. The first time she hummed a familiar tune while organizing his study, the impossible happened. The ruthless Mafia King closed his eyes and drifted into a deep sleep. He suddenly needs her to survive, but she refuses to bow to his intimidating aura. In a dangerous world filled with cutthroat family drama, expect a beautifully agonizing slow-burn romance to unfold. Can the Underworld King protect his newfound peace, or will her secrets tear his empire apart? Grab your snacks, because you won't want to miss a second of this. Make sure to hit that subscribe button. Drop a comment below and let me know where you are watching from. The penthouse of the Latte World Tower didn't feel like a home. It felt like a glass-walled cage. Outside, Seoul was a glittering sprawl of neon blues and frantic ambers, a city that supposedly never slept. But for Ryu Jin-woo, that phrase wasn't a marketing slogan, it was a life sentence. Jin-woo stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, his reflection staring back at him with hollowed eyes and a jawline so sharp it looked carved from obsidian. He was 32 years old, the undisputed head of the Il-sung Syndicate, and he was dying. Not from a bullet or a blade, though many had tried, but from the simple, agonizing absence of rest. It had been 2,190 days. 6 years. He had tried everything: Swiss clinics, illegal sedatives that could floor a rhino, meditation under freezing waterfalls in the Bukhansan Mountains. Nothing worked. The moment he closed his eyes, the demons, as his enemies called them, began their cacophony. His brain was a high-speed rail that had lost its brakes, perpetually screaming through a dark tunnel. "Sir?" The voice was low, filtered through the intercom. It was Secretary Kim, the only man Jin-woo hadn't fired or maimed in a sleep-deprived rage. "Speak," Jin-woo rasped. His throat felt like it was lined with rusted staples. "The new domestic staff candidate is here. The one from the international agency." Jin-woo rubbed his temples. "I told you no more. The last one cried when I looked at her. The one before that tried to sell my hair to a tabloid. This one is different." Kim hesitated. "She's the one we discussed. Amara. She has the highest clearance and a recommendation from the Blue House's former security detail." Jin-woo sighed, a ghost of a sound. "Send her in. If she faints, throw her out." The doors to the study groaned open. Jin-woo didn't turn around. He waited for the familiar sound of trembling heels or a hitch in breath. Instead, he heard the steady, rhythmic gait of someone who walked like they owned the ground beneath them. "You're late," Jin-woo said, his voice a low growl. "It's 2 a.m. "Actually, I'm early," a voice replied. It wasn't the submissive, high-pitched tone he was used to. It was rich, velvety, and carried a distinct, no-nonsense weight. "The shift we agreed upon starts at 2:15 a.m. I've been waiting in the foyer for 15 minutes because your security team insisted on checking my shoes for explosives." Jin-woo turned. Amara stood in the center of the room, her presence cutting through the oppressive luxury of the suite. She was Afro-Korean, her skin a deep, radiant bronze that glowed against the stark white of her professional uniform. Her hair was pulled back into a sleek, efficient bun, and her mahogany eyes met his without a flicker of fear. She wasn't a maid in the traditional sense. She looked like a soldier disguised as a housekeeper. "You know who I am?" Jin-woo asked, stepping into the light. He purposely let his Mafia Boss aura bleed out, the coldness that made grown men kneel. Amara didn't kneel. She didn't even blink. "I know you're Ryu Jin-woo. I know you run the most powerful syndicate in the country. And I know you look like you haven't slept since the last administration." A flicker of genuine surprise crossed Jin-woo's face. You have a big mouth for someone whose life depends on my whim. My life depends on my competence, she corrected him calmly, crossing her arms. And right now, this room is a mess of negative energy and stale air. If you want a puppet, hire a doll. If you want your life managed so you can focus on not collapsing during your next board meeting, I'm the only one who can do it. For the first time in years, Jin-woo felt a spark of something other than exhaustion. It was irritation, yes, but it was sharp. It was alive. Fine, he muttered. Go. Do whatever it is you do. Just stay out of my sight. The next hour was a blur of shadows. Jin-woo sat in his leather armchair, staring at a stack of ledgers that he couldn't focus on. In the background, Amara moved through the penthouse like a ghost. There was no clattering of dishes or heavy footsteps. She was efficient, silent, and strangely soothing. She began organizing his study, her movements methodical. Jin-woo watched her through half-lidded eyes. She was a fearless outsider, as the reports had said, a woman who had navigated worlds far more dangerous than his living room. Then it happened. Amara was dusting a bookshelf in the far corner when a soft sound began to vibrate through the air. It wasn't music, not exactly. It was a low, melodic humming. It was a tune Jin-woo didn't recognize, something soulful and old, a blend of a gospel lullaby and a traditional folk melody. Stop that, Jin-woo said, but the words lacked their usual bite. Amara didn't stop. She didn't even seem to realize she was doing it. The humming grew slightly louder, a rhythmic, repetitive cadence that seemed to sync with the ticking of the clock on the wall. Jin-woo leaned his head back. He intended to yell at her again. He intended to tell her that silence was a requirement of her employment. But as the melody drifted over him, the demons in his head, the screaming voices of rivals, the memories of fire and betrayal, suddenly went quiet. The high-speed rail in his brain finally hit a station. His eyelids, which usually felt like they were propped open by needles, grew impossibly heavy. The sound of her humming was a silk ribbon, wrapping around his jagged edges. 1 minute. 2 minutes. Amara turned around to ask where the specialized glass cleaner was kept, but the words died in her throat. The Underworld King, the man who had terrified Seoul for a decade, was slumped in his chair. His head was tilted to the side, his breathing was deep and rhythmic, and his hands, usually clenched into fists, were open and relaxed. Ryu Jin-woo was asleep. Amara stood still, the dust cloth forgotten in her hand. She looked at the man, the monster, and saw only a soul that was profoundly, dangerously tired. She walked over quietly and picked up a cashmere throw from the sofa. As she draped it over his shoulders, his brow furrowed for a second, a small groan escaping his lips. "Sleep, boss," she whispered, her voice barely a breath. "The world will still be broken when you wake up." She went back to her work, her humming continuing in a low, protective vibration. She didn't know it yet, but she had just become the most valuable and most hunted person in his empire. Because in a world where Ryu Jin-woo never slept, his enemies were safe. But if the king finally found his peace, he would be more dangerous than ever. And he would never, ever let the source of that peace walk away. Here is batch 2 of your story, continuing the Afro-Korean niche storytelling. This section focuses entirely on the narrative progression, building the slow burn romance, and introducing the cutthroat family drama you requested. Sunlight. It was the first thing Ryu Jin-woo registered, blinding and intrusive, piercing through the gaps in the heavy blackout curtains. For a split second, panic seized his chest. He was vulnerable. He had lost time. He reached instinctively for the silver-plated pistol kept under the rim of his mahogany desk, only to find his hand tangled in a soft, cashmere throw. He blinked, the harsh reality of the room slowly coming into focus. He was in his study. He had slept. Not a momentary, feverish doze plagued by the screaming demons of his past, but a deep, dreamless, suffocatingly heavy sleep. He looked at the digital clock on his desk. 11:45 a.m. He had been unconscious for over 9 hours. For a man who hadn't slept a single wink in 6 agonizing years, it felt like waking up from a coma. His mind, usually a chaotic, high-speed rail that had lost its brakes, was eerily, beautifully quiet. I wouldn't move too fast. Your blood pressure is likely recalibrating. Jin-woo's head snapped up. Amara was sitting on a sleek leather sofa across the room, casually flipping through a thick financial dossier she had no business reading. Her professional uniform was still crisp, her posture immaculate. "What did you do to me?" Jin-woo's voice was a gravelly threat, though it lacked its usual lethal edge. Amara didn't flinch. She closed the dossier and set it on the glass table. "I dusted your shelves, organized your 2025 ledgers, and hummed a song my grandmother taught me. You did the rest." Jin-woo stood up, his towering frame casting a long shadow. He expected her to cower, to apologize, to show the trembling fear every other employee displayed. Instead, she met his gaze with mahogany eyes that held nothing but calm observation. "You drugged me." He stepped closer, invading her space. "If I had drugged you, Mr. Ryu, you would have a migraine, dry mouth, and an elevated heart rate," she replied, her rich, velvety voice unwavering. "Instead, you look like a man who finally put down 100-pound weight. You're welcome, by the way." Jin-woo stopped a foot away from her. He stared down at her, searching for a lie, a tremor, anything. There was nothing. Just the steady presence of a fiercely independent woman. He suddenly realized how close he was. He could smell the faint scent of vanilla and citrus on her skin. For a man accustomed to the smell of fear and expensive cologne, it was intoxicating. "Your contract is void," Jin-woo said abruptly, turning his back on her to pour a glass of water. Amara raised an eyebrow. "Am I fired?" "No," he drank the water in one gulp. "You are promoted. You are no longer domestic staff. You are my personal aide. You go where I go. You stay where I stay. Your salary is quadrupled." "I didn't apply to be a babysitter for a mafia boss." "It wasn't a request," Jin-woo retorted, his mafia boss aura returning, cold and absolute. He suddenly needed her to survive, and he refused to let the source of his newfound peace walk away. "I have boundaries, Mr. Ryu." Amara stood up, smoothing her skirt. "I require 8 hours of sleep, Sundays off, and I will not handle your illegal contraband. If you can agree to that, we have a deal. If not, you can find another lullaby." Jin-woo's jaw tightened. No one dictated terms to the head of the Il-sung Syndicate. But as a lingering echo of his headache threatened to return, he gave a curt nod. "Fine." The peace didn't last. By 2 p.m., the heavy double doors of the penthouse burst open, bypassing Secretary Kim entirely. In walked Ryu Tae-suk. He was Jin-woo's uncle, a man whose expensive tailored suits couldn't hide the venomous ambition radiating from his pores. For 6 years, Tae-suk had been patiently waiting like a vulture. He had bet his entire fortune that Jin-woo's insomnia would drive him mad, leaving the throne of the syndicate wide open. "Jin-woo, my boy," Tae-suk boomed, walking into the living area with a sickeningly sweet smile. "I heard a rumor you missed the morning executive briefing. I came to check on your health." Tae-suk's eyes narrowed as he took in his nephew. He expected to see the hollowed eyes and the violent, shaking exhaustion that had become Jin-woo's trademark. Instead, Jin-woo stood tall, his posture relaxed, his eyes clear and lethal. The demons weren't showing. "My health is perfectly fine, uncle," Jin-woo said smoothly, slipping his hands into his pockets. "Just catching up on some overdue rest." Tae-suk's smile faltered, a flash of genuine rage crossing his features before he masked it. "Rest? How miraculous." It was then that Tae-suk noticed Amara. She was standing silently near the bookshelf, holding a tablet, entirely unbothered by the sudden intrusion of one of Seoul's most dangerous men. "And who is this?" Tae-suk sneered, looking Amara up and down with blatant disrespect. "Your new flavor of the month? I didn't know you imported your help." The air in the room instantly dropped 10 degrees. Jin-woo's muscles coiled, a sudden, violent urge to snap his uncle's neck surging through him. It shocked him. He had never felt protective over an employee before. Before Jin-woo could speak, Amara stepped forward. "I am Mr. Ryu's personal aide," she said, her voice perfectly polite but laced with absolute steel. "And as his aide, it is my duty to inform you that he has a strict schedule today. Unscheduled visits are a breach of syndicate protocol, sir." Tae-suk let out a harsh laugh, stepping toward her to use his physical presence as a weapon. "Do you know who you're speaking to, little girl?" Amara didn't take a single step back. She looked the older man dead in the eye, representing the ultimate fearless outsider facing down elite society. "I know exactly who you are, Mr. Ryu Tae-suk. I also know that raising your voice in this room disrupts the optimal environment I have been hired to maintain. So, I will ask you politely, lower your volume, or I will have security escort you out." Silence descended like a physical weight. Tae-suk looked utterly bewildered, and used to anyone outside the family bloodline speaking to him with such authority. Jin-woo watched her, completely mesmerized. A slow, dark smirk spread across his face. "You heard her, uncle," Jin-woo said softly, the danger in his voice palpable. "It's time for you to leave." Tae-suk glared at them both, his face flushing dark red. He pointed a trembling finger at Jin-woo. "You think you're cured, boy? This empire requires a monster, not a man playing house. We'll see how long this lasts." He spun on his heel and stormed out, the doors slamming behind him. Once they were alone, the heavy silence returned. Jin-woo turned to Amara. The cutthroat family drama had just breached his sanctuary. By standing up to Tae-suk, Amara had unknowingly painted a massive target on her own back. In a world where his enemies were safe as long as he never slept, she was now the biggest threat to their survival. "That was incredibly stupid," Jin-woo said, stepping toward her until only inches separated them. "It was efficient," Amara corrected, looking up at him. Her heart gave a slight, traitorous flutter at his proximity, but she kept her face blank. "He was disrupting your space. I removed the disruption. He is a viper. He will try to kill you just to see if it breaks my mind again." "I've dealt with worse men than your uncle," Amara said softly. Jin-woo reached out, his hand hovering just an inch from her cheek. He didn't touch her, but the heat radiating from his palm sent a shiver down her spine. The beautifully agonizing slow burn had been ignited. "You have no idea what you've walked into," Jin-woo whispered, his voice a dark promise. "But you belong to my shadow now, Amara. I will burn this entire city to ash before I let them take my peace away." The promotion from domestic staff to personal aide wasn't just a title change, it was a total immersion into Ryu Jin-woo's chaotic world. For the next 3 days, Amara was a permanent fixture at his side. She sat in the corner of smoke-filled boardrooms where men with scarred knuckles discussed shipping manifests, and she stood behind him in glass offices as he dismantled corporate rivals with a single phone call. But the real work began when the sun went down. "I can't do this," Jin-woo growled, pacing the length of his bedroom. The room was a stark, minimalist expanse of gray silk and cold marble. "You haven't tried," Amara replied, leaning against the doorframe. She had swapped her uniform for a sharp, tailored black suit that made her bronze skin pop and highlighted her commanding presence. "Sit. Close your eyes." "The moment I close them, the noise starts," he said, stopping in front of her. His clear, lethal eyes were fixed on hers. "It's like 1,000 radio stations playing at once, all of them screaming my name." "Then focus on one sound," she commanded. It was the voice of a strong female lead who refused to be intimidated by his Mafia Boss aura. "Focus on my voice. If I'm here, the demons can't get in." "That's the deal, isn't it? I'm your protection now." Jin-woo hesitated, then sat on the edge of the bed. The Underworld King looked uncharacteristically vulnerable in the dim light. Amara sat in a chair a few feet away, close enough for him to catch the scent of vanilla and citrus that he had found so intoxicating. She began to hum. It wasn't the same tune as before. This one was slower, a deep, rhythmic vibration that seemed to pulse from her chest. It was a piece of her heritage, a soulful melody that acted as a bridge between her two worlds. Jin-woo's breathing hitched. He fought it for 10 minutes, his fingers gripping the silk sheets until his knuckles turned white. But the invisible tether between them was pulling him under. Slowly, his grip loosened. His shoulders dropped. For the fourth night in a row, the man who hadn't slept for 6 years drifted into a peaceful darkness. Amara watched him sleep, her own heart performing a traitorous flutter. She was supposed to be his employee, his aide, his lullaby. But as she looked at the sharp lines of his face softened by sleep, she realized the slow burn was becoming a fire she might not be able to put out. The invitation arrived on a slab of heavy gold leaf cardstock. The Il-sung Group's annual charity gala was the event of the year, a gathering of the city's elite, from politicians to the heads of rival syndicates. It was also a battlefield. "You're coming with me," Jin-woo stated, watching Amara review the guest list. "As your aide? Or as a target?" she asked without looking up. "Both," he replied. "My uncle Tae-suk will be there. He's already whispering to the board that I've been compromised by a foreign distraction. I need them to see that you aren't a distraction. You're an asset." The night of the gala, the grand ballroom of the Shilla Hotel was a sea of black tuxedos and designer handbooks. When Jin-woo entered, the room went silent. He looked every bit the powerful syndicate head, but it was the woman on his arm who drew every eye. Amara wore a floor-length, backless gown in a deep emerald green that complemented her radiant skin. Her hair was styled in an intricate crown of braids, adorned with small gold flakes. She looked less like a maid and more like a queen from a different empire. It was the ultimate fearless outsider versus elite society moment. "Look at them," Jin-woo whispered, leaning close to her ear. "They're terrified because they can't place you. They don't know your price." "Good," Amara smiled, though it didn't reach her eyes. "Let them wonder." The family drama hit its peak when Ryu Tae-suk approached them, flanked by a group of older, stern-looking men. Jin-woo, Tae-suk sneered, his eyes raking over Amara with undisguised contempt. "I see you've brought your helper. I didn't realize the Il-sung Syndicate had started a diversity program." The men behind him chuckled, but the sound died instantly when Jin-woo stepped forward, his aura turning cold and absolute. "Careful, uncle," Jin-woo said, his voice a low, dangerous vibration. "Amara has more clearance than half the people in this room. If you insult her again, I'll consider it a direct challenge to my judgment. And you know how I handled challenges." Amara didn't wait for Jin-woo to fight her battle. She stepped forward, meeting Tae-suk's gaze with the steady presence of a woman who had navigated far more dangerous worlds. "Mr. Ryu," she said, her voice carrying across the immediate circle. "I've spent the last 3 days auditing the logistics wing of the syndicate, the one you oversee. I found irregularities in the Busan port records. Perhaps instead of worrying about my dress, you should be worrying about the 3 billion won gap in your quarterly report." Tae-suk's face went pale, then a mottled purple. The board members behind him began to murmur. Amara had just fired a shot directly into the heart of his power base. "You," Tae-suk hissed, but Amara simply turned away, taking a glass of champagne from a passing waiter. "Enjoy the evening, sir," she said over her shoulder. The victory was short-lived. 2 hours later, as the gala was winding down, Secretary Kim rushed toward Jin-woo, his face ashen. "Sir, there's an issue at the penthouse. The security feed was cut 5 minutes ago." Jin-woo's hand tightened on his glass until it shattered. He didn't look at the blood on his palm, he looked at Amara. The cutthroat family drama had shifted from words to violence. "Tae-suk," Jin-woo spat. "He's trying to remove the source of my rest." "We're going," Amara said, her professional instincts kicking in. She didn't wait for his command. She was already heading for the exit, her silk gown trailing behind her like a battle cape. They reached the Latte World Tower in record time. The lobby was eerily quiet. As the private elevator ascended to the penthouse, Jin-woo pulled a sleek black handgun from his waistband. "Stay behind me," he ordered. "Not a chance," Amara replied, pulling a small, high-voltage taser from her clutch, a gift from her time in the Blue House security detail. The elevator doors opened to chaos. The penthouse had been tossed. Vases were smashed, and the financial dossiers Amara had meticulously organized were scattered like snow. In the center of the room stood 3 men, mercenaries, not syndicate members. Tae-suk had gone outside the family to do his dirty work. "Where is she?" one of the men barked, not realizing the she was standing right there. The fight was swift and brutal. Jin-woo moved like a shadow, his movements fueled by a protective rage he had never felt before. But it was Amara who surprised them. When one mercenary lunged at her, she dropped low, swept his legs, and delivered a debilitating shock to his neck before he even touched the floor. She wasn't a maid. She was a soldier disguised as a housekeeper. When the room was finally silent, Jin-woo stood amidst the wreckage, breathing hard. He turned to find Amara checking the pulse of one of the unconscious men. She looked up, a smudge of soot on her cheek, her emerald dress torn at the hem. "You're bleeding," she said, pointing to his hand. Jin-woo ignored the wound. He walked over, grabbed her by the waist, and pulled her flush against him. The beautifully agonizing slow burn finally snapped. "I told you," he whispered, his forehead resting against hers. "I will burn this city to ash before I let them take you." "Then we'd better start looking for matches," Amara replied, her hand coming up to cup his face. "Because your uncle just declared war." The penthouse was a graveyard of shattered glass and ruined mahogany, but all Jin-woo could focus on was the pulse beating wildly at the base of Amara's throat. He had pulled her flush against his chest, driven by a raw, feral need to ensure she was safe. For a fleeting second, the heavy scent of gunpowder and smoke was entirely replaced by her intoxicating signature of vanilla and citrus. But as his grip tightened, the reality of their physical proximity snapped into sharp focus. His large hand, firmly planted on her waist, had shifted in the chaos, his thumb accidentally brushing the soft underside of her breast. Amara stiffened. Every alarm bell in her mind screamed at her to step back, but her treacherous heart hammered a frantic, heavy rhythm against her ribs. She loved him. It was a terrifying, suffocating realization that had been creeping up on her during the quiet hours of the night shift. But she was a woman surviving in a cutthroat foreign underworld. She could not afford the luxury of vulnerability. If she let him see how much his touch affected her, she would lose her armor entirely. "Mr. Ryu," Amara said, her voice a strained, velvety whisper that betrayed none of her internal chaos. "You are crossing a line." Jin-woo's lethal eyes met hers, dark and swirling with unspoken emotions. "Your hand," she continued, forcing her tone to remain clinical and detached. "You are on my waist. And your thumb is somewhere it explicitly shouldn't be." Jin-woo blinked, the protective haze lifting just enough for him to realize what he was doing. He pulled his hands back as if her skin were made of white-hot iron, taking 2 large steps backward. The sudden absence of his warmth left Amara feeling inexplicably cold, though she kept her posture rigid and her expression utterly blank. "I apologize." Jin-woo's voice was rough, the syllables feeling foreign on his tongue. The head of the Il-sung Syndicate did not apologize to anyone. It was the adrenaline. "I wasn't thinking." "See that you don't make a habit of it," she replied smoothly, turning away to brush the glass shards from her torn emerald gown. "Keep the wall up," she told herself. "He is a boss, you are an aide. Do not let him break you." Jin-woo watched her back, a heavy knot of guilt twisting in his gut. He wanted her. He wanted to close the distance, to pull her back into the shadows and claim her. But looking around the ruined penthouse, the reality of his violently dangerous life crashed down on him. He was a walking target, and Tae-suk had just proven that anyone close to him was collateral damage. Vulnerability was a death sentence in his world. I will give you distance, Jin-woo said quietly, his Mafia Boss aura settling back over his shoulders like a heavy winter coat. It won't happen again. You have my word. The promise stung them both, an invisible blade cutting through the beautifully agonizing slow burn they had been desperately trying to ignore. Before the heavy silence could suffocate them completely, a sharp, piercing ring echoed through the destroyed room. Jin-woo reached into his jacket pocket, pulling out his secure cell phone. He looked at the caller ID, and all the blood drained from his face. It was a look Amara had never seen on him, not when facing down armed mercenaries, and not when dismantling rival syndicates. It was pure, unadulterated dread. He answered the call, pressing the phone to his ear. Mother. Amara paused her cleanup, watching him carefully. Jin-woo, a sharp, aristocratic voice crackled through the receiver, loud enough for Amara to hear the icy command in the woman's tone. I am boarding my flight from Jeju. I will be in Seoul tomorrow morning. Tomorrow? I wasn't expecting you until the quarterly review. Plans change, his mother interrupted flawlessly. And so do my limits regarding your personal life. I am coming to inspect the penthouse, but more importantly, I expect you to uphold the promise you made to me last Chuseok. Jin-woo closed his eyes, pinching the bridge of his nose. Mother, the syndicate is currently... I do not care about the syndicate's daily squabbles, she snapped. You promised me that by my next visit, you would present your fiancé. If I arrive tomorrow and you are still insisting on this ridiculous bachelor lifestyle, I will personally finalize the marriage contract with the Choi family's youngest daughter. I will not have our bloodline remain unsecured while your uncle circles the throne like a vulture. See you tomorrow, my son. The line went dead. Jin-woo stared at the phone, completely blindsided. The Choi family was the most traditional, power-hungry clan in the country. A marriage to them wouldn't just be a political alliance, it would be a hostile takeover of his life. He slowly lowered the phone, his eyes drifting across the ruined room until they landed on Amara. She was already looking at him, one eyebrow raised in silent questioning. An utterly insane, desperate idea began to form in Jin-woo's mind. No, Amara said, before he even opened his mouth. I haven't asked anything yet, Jin-woo countered, stepping over a broken vase to approach her. You have the look of a man who is about to ask me to do something deeply unprofessional, incredibly dangerous, and entirely outside my pay grade. She crossed her arms, standing her ground. And considering I just heard your mother threaten to marry you off to the Choi family, I can guess exactly what that favor is. Jin-woo stopped a few feet away, respecting the distance he had just promised her. It would only be for 24 hours. One day, Amara. Just until she leaves. Amara let out a laugh of pure disbelief, shaking her head. The audacity of this man was staggering. Let me get this straight. I am your personal aide. I manage your schedule. I fight off your uncle's mercenaries. I literally sing you to sleep so you don't lose your mind. And now, you want me to play your fake fiancé for the most intimidating matriarch in Seoul. I will double your yearly salary for the inconvenience. I don't want your money, Jin-woo, she fired back, her professional veneer finally slipping to reveal the fiery, strong female lead underneath. Do you have any idea how insane this is? I am an Afro-Korean woman with a background in security, not a chaebol heiress. Your mother will take one look at me and tear us both to shreds. You run a multi-billion-won empire, you terrify grown men for a living, and yet you are trying to use me as a human shield against your own mother. Jin-woo took the verbal abuse without flinching. He knew he deserved it. He looked down, his broad shoulders slumping slightly. You're right, he admitted softly. It's a terrible plan. It's selfish. I don't trust anyone else in this city. You are the only real thing in my life right now. Amara's breath hitched. Damn him. He didn't use threats and he didn't use money. He used the one thing she couldn't defend against, his genuine, heartbreaking vulnerability. She looked at the Underworld King, standing amidst the wreckage of his life, asking for a lifeline. She wanted to say no. She wanted to pack her bags and leave before her heart got permanently shattered. But deep down, beneath her fierce independence and professional armor, she cared for him profoundly. She couldn't let him be forced into a miserable political marriage, and she certainly couldn't leave him to face the vipers alone. 24 hours, Amara sighed, pinching the bridge of her nose. Jin-woo's head snapped up, hope flickering in his dark eyes. You'll do it. Under strict conditions, she warned, pointing a stern finger at him. The fake fiancé protocol. No unscripted physical contact, hand-holding for appearances only. Nothing else. Total transparency, you brief me on everything your mother expects to hear. No surprises. A definitive exit strategy. Once she boards her flight back, the engagement is broken off immediately due to irreconcilable differences. Jin-woo nodded quickly, relief washing over his sharp features. Agreed. Whatever you need. I need to regret this in the morning, she muttered, turning to grab a broom to start sweeping up the glass. Because right now, I think we've both lost our minds. Jin-woo watched her work, the tension in his chest finally easing. He had secured his shield against his mother, but as he watched Amara move, he realized the terrifying truth. He didn't want a fake engagement. He wanted her, entirely and permanently, and spending the next 24 hours pretending to be in love was going to be the most dangerous torture he had ever endured. At precisely 9 a.m., the private elevator chimed. The ruined penthouse from the night before had been miraculously restored by a silent, terrified cleaning crew, but the tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a blade. Madame Ryu stepped out. She was a vision of terrifying elegance in a sharp, pearl-white Chanel suit, her eyes sweeping the room like a general assessing a battlefield. Behind her stood two silent bodyguards. Mother, Jin-woo said, bowing respectfully. Madame Ryu didn't look at him. Her sharp, aristocratic gaze was entirely fixed on Amara, who stood beside Jin-woo. Amara wore a modest, but impeccably tailored navy dress, her posture radiating calm confidence. So, Madame Ryu's voice was like cracking ice. This is the reason you are rejecting the Choi family's youngest daughter. An unconventional choice, Jin-woo. And highly undocumented. Who is she? My name is Amara, she stepped forward, extending a hand. She didn't wait for Jin-woo to defend her. And I assure you, Madame Ryu, I am far more valuable to your son's empire than a political alliance with the Choi family. Madame Ryu ignored the hand, her eyes narrowing. Bold words for an outsider. What exactly do you bring to the Il-sung Syndicate besides a pretty face? Jin-woo's jaw tightened, ready to intervene, but Amara gently rested a hand on his arm, a calculated, scripted touch. I bring efficiency, madam, Amara replied smoothly. For instance, while reviewing the logistics wing, I located a 3 billion won gap in the Busan port records overseen by your brother-in-law, Tae-suk. I have already drafted the restructuring plan to recover the assets and insulate Jin-woo from the fallout. Madame Ryu paused. The insult she had prepared died on her tongue. She looked from Amara to Jin-woo, a flicker of genuine surprise and respect, crossing her cold features. In the brutal world of the chaebol, competence was the ultimate currency. You found Tae-suk's leak? Madame Ryu mused, a dangerous smile touching her lips. Perhaps you are not entirely useless after all. The fragile truce was shattered an hour later when the penthouse doors burst open. Ryu Tae-suk stormed in, looking unhinged, clutching a thick manila folder. Don't listen to a word they say, sister-in-law. Tae-suk yelled, pointing a shaking finger at Amara. It's a lie. She isn't his fiancée. I have her employment contract right here. She's on the payroll. She's a glorified maid. Jin-woo stepped in front of Amara, his aura turning cold and lethal. But it was Madame Ryu who spoke. Quiet, Tae-suk, she snapped. I do not care how they met. I care that this glorified maid found the 3 billion won you have been siphoning from my family's ports. Tae-suk went pale. That is a fabrication. It is documented, Amara said firmly, stepping out from behind Jin-woo. Desperate and cornered, Tae-suk lunged toward Amara. It was a foolish, fatal mistake. Before Tae-suk could take 2 steps, Jin-woo grabbed him by the throat, lifting the older man inches off the floor. The Underworld King had returned. "If you ever step foot in my home again, Uncle," Jin-woo whispered, his voice vibrating with absolute menace, "I will ensure you never walk again. Leave. Now." Jin-woo dropped him. Tae-suk scrambled backward, gasping for air, and fled the penthouse under the cold, scrutinizing gaze of Madame Ryu. The matriarch adjusted her pearl necklace, entirely unfazed by the violence. She looked at Jin-woo, then at Amara. "She is fine. And she keeps your enemies at bay. Keep her, Jin-woo. The Choi girl would have bored you anyway." With that, Madame Ryu turned and walked back to the elevator. The 24 hours were over. They had won. Silence reclaimed the penthouse. The fake engagement had served its purpose. Amara walked over to the mahogany desk and picked up her tablet. Her heart felt like it was made of lead. She had survived the Vipers, she had protected the man she loved, and now it was time to execute the definitive exit strategy. "I'll have Secretary Kim draft the separation statement," Amara said, her voice strictly professional. "We can leak to the press that we had irreconcilable differences. I will pack my things and be out by..." "No." Jin-woo crossed the room in 3 long strides. He didn't stop at a respectful distance. He stepped directly into her space, breaking the no unscripted physical contact rule completely. He gently took the tablet from her trembling hands and tossed it onto the sofa. "Jin-woo," Amara warned, her voice wavering as she tried to maintain her armor. "The contract is over." "I am voiding the contract," he said softly, his dark eyes searching hers. The walls he had built around his heart for 6 long years were crumbling to dust. He was choosing to be vulnerable. "I told you I would give you distance. I lied. I can fight off mercenaries, Amara. I can dismantle rival syndicates. But I cannot do this without you." Amara looked up at him, a tear finally breaking free and tracing a path down her bronze cheek. "I'm an aide, Jin-woo. If I stay, you'll break my heart. If you leave, I won't have a heart left to beat," he whispered. He reached up, his large, calloused hand cupping her cheek. This time, he didn't pull away. Amara leaned into his touch, her eyes fluttering shut. When he leaned down and pressed his lips to hers, the beautifully agonizing slow burn finally ignited into a roaring fire. It was desperate, passionate, and deeply possessive. The Underworld King had finally found his peace. And as he pulled her closer against his chest, he silently vowed to the shadows that he would spend the rest of his life protecting her. Make sure to hit that subscribe button. Drop a comment below and let me know what trope should we tackle next. Like the video, turn on notifications, and I'll see you in the next story.